Good evening, friends. On this night, we Christians embark on a solemn journey. We follow in the footsteps of Jesus as he celebrates his Last Supper with his disciples, as he then is betrayed, is arrested, is hung on the cross, and is buried in the tomb. There are many ways we could commemorate Jesus' Last Supper. For one, we could have a Seder meal. That is exactly what they were doing. Jesus, Matthew, Mark, Luke, Judas, all of his disciples were there with him on that evening, and they were having a Seder meal. But it would be kind of difficult. I am here, you are there. So to hold a meal together, commemorating the Passover, would be very difficult, perhaps another year. After all, we are closed in our homes because of this pandemic. Another way in which we could celebrate this evening or commemorate, I'm not sure that I like to use the word celebrate because, as I said, it is a solemn time. But to commemorate this Last Supper that the Lord had with the disciples, we could also have a tenebrae service. If we were in the church, we would certainly do that. We would light the candles, we would read scripture, we would extinguish the candles one at a time. And we have done that on past Maundy Thursdays. But again, it would be kind of difficult for us to accomplish that particular form of worship tonight. We could also embark on a washing of the feet. According to one account, that is exactly what Jesus did that night. He washed the feet of the disciples, much to their chagrin, but he wanted to demonstrate that he was a servant. And finally, we can celebrate with Holy Communion, which was a part of that meal, and I will be reading scripture to describe that particular event. I chose the reading from Matthew, the institution of the Lord's Supper, found in Matthew 26, verses 14 through 14 through 30. Then one of the 12, who was called Judas Iscariot, went to the chief priests and said, "What will you give me if I betray him to you?" They paid him 30 pieces of silver, and from that moment he began to look for an opportunity to betray him. On the first day of unleavened bread, the disciples came to Jesus saying, "Where do you want us to make the preparations for you to eat the Passover?" He said, "Go into the city to a certain man and say to him, 'The teacher says, my time is near. I will keep the Passover at your house with my disciples.'" So the disciples did as Jesus had directed them, and they prepared the Passover meal. When it was evening, he took his place with the 12, and while they were eating, he said, "Truly, I tell you, one of you will betray me." And they became greatly distressed and began to say to one another, "Surely not I, Lord." He answered, "The one who has dipped his hand into the bowl with me will betray me. The Son of Man goes as it is written of him, but woe to that one by whom the Son of Man is betrayed. It would have been better for that one not to have been born." Judas, who betrayed him, said, "Surely not I, Rabbi." He replied, "You have said so." While they were eating, Jesus took a loaf of bread, and after blessing it, he broke it, gave it to his disciples, and said, "Take, eat, this is my body." Then he took a cup, and after giving thanks, he gave it to them, saying, "Drink from it, all of you, for this is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins. I tell you, I will never again drink of this fruit of the vine until that day when I drink it new with you in my Father's kingdom."
Call from 304-241-0926.
When they had sung the hymn, they went out to the Mount of Olives. As I said before partaking of communion, we could also commemorate this evening with the washing of feet. And I suggested that this would not be easy to do at this time, since, again, I am here and you are there. Yes, I could wash Russ's feet. You, if you're with your spouse, your partner, could wash each other's feet, but it just wouldn't feel the same as if we were all gathered together and using that as a means of remembering what Jesus did and how he was a servant to everyone. He did not want to be served. He served others. However, I am going to read the scripture according to John. Then I will share a reflection. Now, before the festival of the Passover, Jesus knew that his hour had come to depart from this world and go to the Father. Having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. The devil had already put it into the heart of Judas, son of Simon Iscariot, to betray him. And during supper, Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hands, and that he had come from God and was going to God, got up from the table, took off his outer robe, and tied a towel around himself. Then he poured water into a basin and began to wash the disciples' feet and to wipe them with the towel that was tied around him. He came to Simon Peter, who said to him, "Lord, Are you going to wash my feet?" Jesus answered, "You do not know now what I am doing, but later you will understand." Peter said to him, "You will never wash my feet." Jesus answered, "Unless I wash you, you have no share with me." Simon Peter said to him, "Lord, not my feet only, but also my hands and my head." Jesus said to him, "One who has bathed does not need to wash except for the feet, but is entirely clean. And you are clean, though not all of you." For he knew who was to betray him. For this reason he said, "Not all of you are clean." After he had washed their feet, had put on his robe, and had returned to the table, he said to them, "Do you know what I have done to you? You call me teacher and Lord, and you are right, for that is what I am. So if I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I have set you an example, that you also should do as I have done to you." She made a New Year's resolution never to say never. Janet Kirkman had never intended to marry, have children, work on computers, and live in California. But she did get married, has 2 wonderful children, worked for a computer giant, and lived in California. God overturned nearly all her planned nevers. Proverbs 16, verse 9 says, "A man's heart plans his way, but the Lord directs his steps." Janet had planned her way, but the Lord directed her steps. Such a resolution reminds us that God's plans may be very different from our own, but it can also safeguard us against pride and our vulnerability to temptation under pressure. As Jesus was teaching his disciples about true service by washing their feet, Peter said to him, "You shall never wash my feet." But when the Lord told him he could have no part with him without learning that lesson, Peter quickly reversed himself. A little later, Peter again tripped over that word, never. "Even if all are made to stumble because of you," he said to Jesus emphatically, "I will never be made to stumble." That never soon melted into bitter tears of shame and remorse. Janet recommends, watch your nevers. Nevers are me-oriented, and God is He-oriented. She suggests that we keep our focus on God, which is where it belongs. Have you said, never? Never would I do this. Never would I be there. Certainly, we thought never would we be in this circumstance. But here we are. However, we can say, I to Christ my life have given, ever his alone to be. Oh, what peace and blessed assurance that he has a plan for me. God does indeed have a plan for each of us. Do we know what the outcome will be? Do we know what steps we will be taking? Not at this time. Oh, we can conjecture. We can be with the pundits who say another week, another month, another 2 months to be closed into our homes, to be wearing masks, to be worried about our friends and our family and ourselves. But no one knows. No one knows where the end will be or when the end will come. So this evening, please take a moment to reflect upon that time that Jesus reclined at table with his disciples. He experienced the betrayal of Judas Iscariot. He washed their feet. He ate a Seder meal. And he instituted his first communion. And tomorrow we will commemorate his crucifixion on the cross.